Everybody, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Tyngsborough TV Live. I am, of course, Town Media Director Steve Brogan, and we are doing a special series for the last month, basically, on substance abuse awareness and prevention for Substance Abuse Prevention Month. So we've had a few programs now. This is the third in the series that have been put together by Donna McPartlin from our Board of Health and Maria Ruggiero from the Tewksbury Police. She works for the Tewksbury Police Department, but works for a program called SAPSI. And we also have a special guest in today. His name is Jake Kavanaugh. He's going to talk to us about his project, the NAN Project, which is a suicide awareness and prevention group. So they do a lot of really good work. Just so folks know, if you don't already, you can catch all of our broadcasts on either Comcast Channel 8, Verizon 29. You can catch them on Facebook on the various pages we share it across, as well as on YouTube and through tyngsboroughma.gov on our video on demand and streaming service. So feel free to grab any one of those. Also, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Really helps us to get this information out to the community and spread it around, because sometimes Facebook likes to crush it down and stuff. You know, they do their funny algorithm stuff. So anyways, I'll stop venting. So as I mentioned, our guest today is Jake Kavanaugh and Donna McPartlin. Donna's from our Board of Health, and Jake is from the NAN Project. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for both being here. So our subject is suicide, right? And now, Jake, you started a project called the NAN Project. But before we get into that, I want to actually kind of learn a little bit about you and what got you into this whole thing. Because I feel like suicide and any one of these, a lot of these social service or these issues, you don't necessarily like wake up one morning and say, I want to work in the field of suicide prevention. So something tends to drive you. So what was it about you that got you into this whole thing?
That's absolutely right. Growing up, I had very little knowledge about mental health awareness. Suicide wasn't even on my radar. I had very little background in it. Unfortunately, in early 2012, I lost my sister to suicide. I'd known that she struggled with various mental health concerns for several years, but I didn't know what to do with that information. And that's kind of what led me to educate myself more about the risk factors that go into a suicide, and then do some brainstorming about how we could change the culture around mental health issues.
So it was your sister's suicide that caused you to create the NAN Project?
Yes. So she passed away in early 2012.
Okay.
I was living abroad at the time. When I moved back in mid-2015, I started brainstorming with my mother about what's a program we can do to ensure that other young people don't have to go through the struggles that she went through, the stigma that surrounds so many mental health challenges.
So give me a 10,000-foot view of the NAN Project itself. What exactly does it do?
Okay. In one sentence, we try and provide mental health awareness, suicide prevention programs to students in our schools in Massachusetts. To dig a little deeper, the way we do that is through a peer-to-peer model where we have young adults who have lived experience with various mental health concerns, but we work with them to tell their stories about what they struggled with, what depression looked like for a 16-year-old, what bipolar disorder is, what does it mean if you're struggling with anxiety, but more importantly, what are some supports you can turn to if you're struggling or if one of your friends are struggling. And we work with these young people to go into the classrooms, tell their stories, talk about what they went through, but more importantly, offer a message of hope and say that, you know what, even if you are struggling with one of these mental health concerns, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Before you created this project, was there a lot of support mechanisms for suicide prevention?
I wasn't aware of them.
Okay.
Again, it wasn't something that was ever on my radar.
Right.
So I did not know what resources someone could turn to if they were struggling, if they were, if they had depression, if they had anxiety. I was not aware, and that's kind of what we're trying to do, is show young people really that there are supports out there.
It's an unfortunate seemingly symptom of our society, because we were talking off camera about some of the stats, and it seems like the numbers, I had asked as far back as, say, a few decades compared to now, what do the numbers look like? And you had a pretty staggering answer for that, at least for me anyways. I felt that was pretty staggering.
So the numbers are hard to really define. Just because a lot of suicides go unreported.
True, right.
But they think within the last 10 years, suicide rates have probably gone up at least 50%, which is just staggering. If you look at the younger demographic, maybe 10 to 14-year-olds, it's gone up over 100% in the last 10 years. So it's a crisis that we really need to be thinking about. but unfortunately, it doesn't get a lot of media attention.
Well, it is one of those things. It's like people don't like to talk about suicide. I mean, I have some personal experience in this for myself. I've had a couple in my family, you know, my mom and some other things, some other people. But
Sorry to hear that.
but it's something that nobody wanted to talk about. And even after, you know, my first uncle, when he did it, you know, again, people just kind of like were like, okay, that's the end of it, and we'll move on. And then his brother, my other uncle, did it after that, and it's the same thing. It was like crickets. Nobody had any conversations about it. Of course, you know, family's grieving; they don't want to bring it up. But at the same time, even years later, down the line, still nobody ever really wants to talk about it. At least in my family, and I feel like it's the same thing out in general society. It's kind of one of those uncomfortable conversations. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. There's a massive stigma that surrounds suicide. A lot of families feel almost ashamed if they lose someone to suicide. I think there's also a feeling that, you know, we missed something, we didn't do enough, it was our fault. And we want to break that down. We want to show you it's not a family's fault typically if one of their family members ends their life by suicide. An interesting fact around the stigma is that in Massachusetts, suicide wasn't even allowed to be put on your death certificate until the late 1980s.
No kidding, really.
And that had to do a lot with the religious aspect to it. If you die by suicide, you couldn't go into a Catholic cemetery. So that's an interesting little tidbit. And it did influence the stigma that surrounds suicide.
Okay, very interesting. So, obviously, with your project, you said you do it to raise awareness. You get into the schools. Have you had any people with reservations that haven't wanted to, or has everybody been open about allowing you in to talk to the kids about this?
Oh, absolutely. We run into this. When we started out this project, probably early 2016, a lot of the first schools we went to, they said, you know, you can come in here, talk about emotional well-being. You can talk maybe about mental health, even depression, anxiety. Don't bring up the word suicide.
Really?
We don't want to plant that idea in our students' heads. And that's really a myth that we try and break down, that talking about suicide, asking a friend if they're thinking about suicide might put the idea in their head. I mean, that's just ludicrous.
I feel like that's ignoring the problem.
It's both ignoring the problem and it's dangerous. I mean, talking about suicide opens up the conversation.
Yeah.
It breaks down that stigma. So it's definitely something we ran into. We are seeing schools being more and more open to it. And I think once we open that first door into those first couple schools, it's become a lot easier because they can sort of refer to those schools and see what their experience has been with us, and made it a little bit easier for us to open more doors.
I feel like this was kind of treated almost like sex ed. Like you know, we don't want to talk about it. We'd rather, you know, or not that they'd rather, but you'd end up hearing it from people on the street as opposed to somebody who's trained and knows what they're talking about. You know, and the same thing with suicide. It's better to hear it from somebody who knows what they're talking about with this, especially somebody who's experienced it.
Another good similarity is with cancer. Used to be the C word.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Suicide is now the S word. We're really trying to make it similar to cancer. That talking about it really takes away the stigma from people who are struggling with suicidal thought, and it opens up the possibility of them getting more help.
So you've been doing this now for 12 years. You said 2016 you started?
We've been doing it about 3 years.
Oh, 3 years. Okay.
3 years. Yep.
Have you noticed in the last few years that that apprehension has kind of diminished, only because, and I ask this because of all the suicides that have happened, you know, from social media, Facebook, and that kind of the bullying and all that stuff? Has that kind of changed the way people think about it?
I think you are seeing a lot more talk about suicide. I think it is coming into mainstream media much more than it was 5 years ago, especially 10, 20 years ago, where it was something that was covered up. You know, someone died accidentally, someone died suddenly, we don't know why. People are becoming more and more willing to talk about suicide, and more importantly, sort of the root causes of suicide and what we can do as individuals, as a society, to try and help people who might be struggling.
So that's actually probably a good segue into this. What are some of the root causes? Because it's not just one thing. There's a bunch of different avenues that could drive somebody to that point.
Absolutely.
What are some of those things?
So some of the main risk factors that lead to suicide are clearly mental health issues. Depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, self-harm. These are all risk factors that if you know someone who's struggling with one or more of these, you should be on the lookout. Some other factors could be a sexual assault, struggling with sexual identity, sexual orientation. These populations have significantly higher rates of suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts than the general population.
Really?
Now, I want to clarify that someone who is going through any one of these issues, that doesn't make them suicidal. It's not to put them in a category. It's to look at them as, okay, I have a friend who's struggling with depression. I should be checking in on them a little bit more. I have a friend who is gay. They're not suicidal because they're gay, but I should be checking out and looking out for other red flags that might be coming up.
And so with suicide, this is one thing I do understand. With suicide, there are a number of signs that you can watch for, and I feel like these are this is something that definitely folks at home should know about, because it's something that it happens in kind of the shadows of someone's life. They don't talk about it. They're not going to come out and say, hey, I'm suicidal. It's up to us really, and family and friends, to watch and say, or watch and see if that person has any of those. So what are some of the symptoms?
So there are some verbal clues that you can be on the lookout for. Someone saying, I wish I go to bed and not wake up, or you'd be better off without me. But I think you're right. A lot of them are nonverbal clues. So someone who's starting to isolate more and more, someone who's lost interest in hobbies that they were previously interested in, someone who all of a sudden takes an interest in substances that wasn't previously prone to that, going out and buying a gun for no particular reason. These are all little clues that, again, they don't necessarily mean someone's suicidal, but it's a good idea to check in on that person.
Right. That's a good idea, is to check in on, because you don't want obviously what you don't want is somebody to take a long-term solution to a short-term problem. Because a lot of these things are things they can work through. It's a temporary bout of depression, and time can help people.
Right. So and that's a message we try and get.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
I was just going to ask, is there a way that you can tell if this is like normal growing pains? Like, do parents do you find that parents are like, well, suck it up, buttercup, like this is just normal growing pains, it's part of life. I had to learn how to deal with things and bullying or whatever.
Absolutely. I don't think you ever want to say suck it up. I think you want to say, reach out to that person who might be struggling with something. Even if it is just growing pains, it doesn't hurt to ask, hey, I've noticed this about you. I'm a little bit concerned. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Have you had these thoughts of suicide? I've seen someone in distress, as you appear to be right now. Let's sit down and talk. I think just opening that conversation, it'll never hurt, and it can only help.
Okay, that's good.
One of the things I found is the most difficult is it's very difficult to quantify how many lives you've actually saved by doing the work, because you never really know if someone's suicidal or not. So it's one of those, you can't get a hard number on it. So with that said, I guess what are some of the things that you suggest to folks? I mean, other than we've already talked about some of them a little bit, but some of the other things, maybe going a little deeper, some things that you suggest to folks that they either A, look at, or B, things that they can say or do for their relative or loved one to help them through that period of time.
I think just being there. It seems so simple and maybe cliche, but being there, showing that you care, showing that you are open ears to whatever they're going through. Not trying to fix their problems, not saying, you should feel this way or don't act like that. Validating what they're feeling, saying, you know what, that seems like a pretty crappy situation. Let me know how I can help. Being those ears for them and just listening. And then if you are concerned, especially if you're a young person, getting that person to a trusted adult, getting them to help. That can be anything from getting them to a therapist, a guidance counselor, someone who has that responsibility and that clinical background that can get them the real resources that they'll need to get through this. But I think most importantly, just being there for them and being open ears for them.
Now, here's a question for you. What if that person is not willing to go for it? Because obviously a lot of people want to help themselves. They don't want to, end their lives that way. But what about the people that they just don't want to listen?
Absolutely. And so that's something when we're in the classrooms, when our peer mentors are presenting, that's a message we always want to leave our young people with. You might not be the right person in this situation to sort of handle this burden. If you are concerned, take that information to a trusted adult. We deal with the younger population. We want to make sure that a 15-year-old, 16-year-old who sees their friend who might be struggling doesn't feel like they have to sit with that information, that they would be a bad friend if they go to the guidance counselor, to a coach, to a teacher, a parent. We want to tell them, you know what, it's so much better to have your friend angry at you and maybe doesn't talk to you for 2 months than they hurt themselves, that they attempt to end their lives.
And they're gone, yeah. Potentially, anyways.
Absolutely,
Is this something that people have to worry about, or have you found that parents are worried about this being on their kids' permanent record somehow, or?
I don't think it goes on a permanent record. I think,
you know, like say somebody was going to go for a security clearance or something that might impact their job, or.
I see what you mean. So having maybe been institutionalized in some way when they were working through this period or something like that, maybe that could come back on them.
Yeah.
I guess.
It potentially could, but I think the chances are very, very slim that if, as a 15-year-old, you need inpatient psychiatric help, that is going to in any way affect you later on in life. And you know what? If you're alive, as opposed to if you've hurt yourself or you were going to hurt yourself, does it really matter?
Yeah, I agree.
Good point.
I have heard people say that, though. They've been afraid of, like, you know, down the road that somehow their help or them asking for help.
As far as I know, that's not something most employers look into or even have access to. So I would definitely recommend.
Even still, I think under 18, your records are sealed anyways, so they wouldn't be able to see that kind of stuff. So I asked you about the schools that you go into, what their sort of reactions were. What about the kids? How do they respond to this? Are they positive, negative, kind of in the middle, or just all over the board?
So this is something I actually had anxiety about before we actually went into schools. You know, we spent 6 months sort of putting together this program, training these young adults. I had no idea what high schoolers were going to react to, and it's been amazing. It's been phenomenal. Almost every single class, we'll have 2, if not 5 students come up to us, want to talk to our peer mentors.
Oh, okay.
Some will say, you know what, I've noticed this in my friend. Thank you for sort of educating me about this. I'm going to go to a guidance counselor. Or, you know what, we lost a friend, and just having you in here talking about it is really helping us process this. But more importantly, just empowering them, giving them sort of the tools they need. They see this every day. They're on the front lines. They see their friends struggling. And this empowers them. This gives them a set of tools to go out and sort of help those friends. And I think it's been an overwhelmingly positive response from the students.
Interesting. It makes me wonder if so obviously you have the kids that want to help their friends, but then there's we'll call them the bullies, who like to pick on the other kids. It makes me wonder if things start clicking in their mind, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't be harassing, Susie or whatever, because it could drive them to this.
Well, and interestingly, most studies have shown that the vast majority of bullies, 60+%, are themselves struggling with a mental health concern. So if it, one, decreases their interest in bullying others, great. But if it also makes them a little introspective and want to sort of maybe think about why they're doing what they're doing, and also maybe get help for themselves, even better.
Interesting. So, not to be too morbid about it, but I'm curious about what are the most common ways that kids in these age brackets are committing suicide. And the reason why I ask this question is because if I'm a parent and I want to make sure my kid doesn't have access to, say, a gun, that's an obvious one. But what are some of the more common? Is it pills hanging? Obviously, you can't hide every rope or belt, but
so that's actually one thing we don't talk about, and we are very clear in our messaging when we're in the classrooms, because one thing we don't ever want to do is give someone who may be considering suicide ideas about how they can go about doing it.
Right. I'm asking more on for our level of discussion, but
it's different between males and females. Males tend to use more violent means. Females tend to use more substance overdosing, if that makes sense. So it does vary by that, but there's not really a clear breakdown by age group.
Okay. Interesting. So kids are receptive. The schools have seemed to open up to this whole process and maybe start to break down that stigma. I guess, where do you see it in 10 years? Do you feel like it's kind of, I won't say Shangri-La, but people have all been, okay, suicide's a major problem, let's actually work on this? Or do you think it's kind of still going to stay sort of under the radar, I guess?
So that's my goal. I mean, our program is replicable in any school.
Okay.
We're in schools across Massachusetts. I would love in 10 years for us to be in schools across the country. And I don't see any reason why not. It's a very simple model. It's easy to bring. It's easy to replicate. I would like to see mental health a subject that every student has to learn about, if only for a semester. And more importantly, learn about the supports and make sure every student coming into a new school is educated about the supports that they are able to access. And I really do think we are moving in that right direction.
Excellent. Are there other... go ahead. No, go ahead.
What kind of age group, like, where do you see the effect of your project? I mean, is it like high school level or middle school or?
So we started out focusing on the high school level just because we had to pick a point. We have been now asked to go into colleges. We've done presentations in several different colleges, and we are working to develop a college curriculum. More importantly, we've seen an incredible demand from middle schools. That is where most mental health concerns, issues start to manifest themselves, and we really think it's a population that doesn't get much mental health education whatsoever. As little as high schoolers get, they at least get something. Most middle schoolers don't know what to look for if a friend's struggling from depression, and certainly don't know where to turn to if they see those signs. So we are in the stages, and we hope by the spring to be rolling out a full middle school platform.
Excellent. Do you feel like, in your opinion, that mental health is one of those under-reported, under-discussed aspects of our society?
Absolutely, absolutely. Mental health and suicide, you hear about every car crash, every gun death, every kind of, out of the ordinary death. You never hear about suicide. Part of that we don't want to cause contagion, and that's when you hear about a suicide and it increases the chances someone will start thinking about suicide, although it doesn't plant the idea.
Basically,
yeah. But mental health is definitely something that we're starting to hear more about, which is great. You have TV shows talking about mental health, which is great. And I think it's going in the right direction, but it's definitely under-talked about, under-discussed.
So I wanted to get back on talking more about the NAN project now. Are there other groups like the NAN project, or are you unique in what you're doing?
Yeah, no, there are other organizations that work with sort of peer-to-peer model.
Okay.
There's a couple here in Massachusetts. I'm not as familiar nationally, but we would absolutely love to bring our program nationally and we're happy to work with other groups that are, just trying to get the message out, that it's okay not to be okay and that there is help out there.
Excellent.
So we're always willing to sort of reach out an arm and a hand and work with others.
So I imagine the NAN project is a nonprofit organization?
Yep, we're a nonprofit. We work under a large behavioral health organization, Elliott Community Human Services.
Oh, okay.
Which we're very fortunate just because we have access to their clinical base, we have access to their facilities, which has been a huge help in getting us into schools and sort of helping us provide some structure to our framework.
Excellent. Yeah.
What do you think about like the Netflix series, like shows like that, like 13 Reasons Why? And
yeah, so we found 13 Reasons Why was dangerous and sort of misleading for a couple reasons. One, they didn't talk about a lot of the risk factors that go into suicide. We know that 80 to 90% of people who end their lives by suicide do so and have a mental health concern. There was almost no discussion of mental health in 13 Reasons Why. We also felt it was almost negligent in that it didn't outline the supports that are available for a young person. It made the guidance counselor seem negligent. It made the parents seem aloof. It made the friends seem downright dangerous. If you're a young person looking at that, you don't know where to turn. If you're going through some of what she went through, you don't know what to turn to, and you're almost afraid to turn to any of those resources, which there are lots of supports for young people, and we wanted to emphasize that, so we created a response to that called 13 Reasons Why We Need to Talk About Suicide.
Interesting. And so you have a really nice website, actually. I'm going to pop it up now so folks can take a look at it. The video that you're mentioning, the 13 Reasons Why video, is actually available through your website, so you can click on follow the link, and it'll take you right to this video. So if you wanted to go watch it, I was going to play it, but it's a lot longer than I expected. 35 minutes. But we can folks can easily watch that if they want to check it out themselves.
The good thing about that also, if I might give a plug for it, is that it's broken down into 13 vignettes. And the first 9 or so vignettes touch on the actual risk factors that go into suicide. Depression, anxiety, sexual assault, sexual orientation. Some of those risk factors to be on the lookout for in yourself, in your friends, in your peers. You should maybe check in on them. We also go over some myths and truths around suicide, some coping strategies, and what to do if you're concerned about one of your peers.
Interesting.
What about peer mentors?
So this was actually made by our peer mentors. So it features our peer mentors, and you'll see a bunch of the NAM Project's peer mentors throughout the video.
So that actually leads me to a question I didn't get a chance to ask you. Was who are the mentors or the trainers? How does the NAN project work, I guess, essentially?
Okay. So yeah, most of our peer mentors they range in age probably from 16 to late 20s, but the vast majority are 18 to 23 years old.
Okay.
The idea being that a young person talking to a student, talking to another young person, will be much more relatable to. These peer mentors, they go through a 4-day training with us. A lot of them have gone through a peer mentor training with the Department of Mental Health's GIFT program. So they do have some peer mentoring background, but we really work with them to craft their comeback stories in a strength-based way that leaves the listener, the audience, the students with a message of hope.
Okay, interesting. So the kids are sourced basically from the community of folks that you've worked with already, it seems like. Kind of a little bit.
A lot of them do have some sort of peer mentoring background, but we're willing to work with just about any young person who's at a stage in their recovery where they're ready to share their story and is interested in going out and speaking in front of students. So we have a application on our website if anyone's interested in joining up.
Excellent. Let me just quickly reset, just so folks know you're watching Tyngsborough TV Live. This is one of our special series that we've been doing for Substance Abuse Awareness Month. This particular episode, we have our guest Jake Kavanaugh, who runs the NAN project, and they focus on suicide awareness and prevention in the schools, which is fantastic, I think. If you want to catch this program or any of our programs, you can check it out on tyngsboroughma.gov on our video on demand and streaming. You can also watch this program and others live on Facebook and YouTube and at Comcast Channel 8 and Verizon Channel 29. And if you're watching on Facebook, feel free to ask comments or questions, rather, if you have any questions for Jake or anybody here.
I have a question,
sure.
somebody.
Go for it.
So people in recovery have told us that there are times that they also didn't want to wake up. So we're beginning to wonder if some people who have overdosed have reached the same point as someone who takes his or her life. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, yes, substance use is a huge risk factor. And being in recovery is actually an incredibly dangerous time for someone who might be thinking about suicide. I would reach out to them and say, you know, you're in a very difficult point, but you sort of made it over the hump. It doesn't seem like it right now, but the fact that you're in recovery, you have made it over. You've made that important life-saving decision. Reach out to those resources. There are resources for people in recovery. And if you are thinking about suicide, you know, there's hotlines to call. We have the suicide prevention hotline on our website. Mm-hmm. There are support groups that are out there. But I think it's important to acknowledge that people in recovery are at a much higher risk of suicide than those not. It by no means everyone in recovery is suicidal, but it means that they are people that you need to check in on and keep in your hearts and keep in contact with.
So actually, while we're on the subject, what are some of the places you can contact, aside obviously from friends and family jumping in, where are some of the places that people can go to reach out if they wanted to reach out on their own and get some help?
Sure. So we have a list of hotlines, websites on our resource page on our website. Mm-hmm. But you know, the main lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK. Mm-hmm. The Samaritans have a text line, which is 741-741. That will get you talking to or messaging with a real-life operator. There's a teen text line and a teen call line. I don't have those right off the top of my head. But if you go to our website, we do have a bunch of resources that you can reach out to.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think you do excellent work. I think this is an excellent program.
Thank you.
In that you're hitting kids, you're getting to kids, which I feel like that's going to slowly start trickling down as they get older into the older generations. Because suicide's obviously a huge problem. We have major issues with it from every spectrum. Socioeconomic group doesn't matter.
Yeah,
hits everybody. Have you done anything or tied in any of this project with veterans in any way?
We don't specifically work with veterans.
Okay.
We have worked with hospitals. We've had our peer mentors go in and present to clinical staff.
Okay.
We don't focus on the veteran population just because we're at almost capacity just working in high schools.
Okay.
There are some great groups that do focus on veterans. There's massmen.org, I believe .org, mm-hmm. and they focus on male suicides. They also have a connection to veterans. So.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Did you guys have anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No,
Any other
I
questions or
would just
stuff you wanna tell
say
folks?
if you're concerned about a friend, take that first step. Check in with them. It sounds so simple, but you could be saving someone's life.
You really could. And sometimes that's all it takes too, is just to ask, say, hey, you having a problem or do you have an issue? You want to talk?
Absolutely.
Even just saying, do you want to talk?
Yep.
Sit down, talk, have a coffee, and have a conversation. It's all it really takes. And you can really make a difference in some folks' lives. Yeah.
Definitely.
Excellent. Well, I applaud you. I think it's fantastic work. I like, as I said earlier, I have some experience with this myself, unfortunately. There's a group that I work with up in New Hampshire that's done some excellent work on the older end, the adult end, and preventing folks from getting hands on firearms, because that's one of the largest and obviously the most lethal, unfortunately. So it's been really eye-opening for me to hear a lot of these stats and just be connected with it in that way. I feel like that's my way of trying to help by doing something like that.
I mean, if we all do our part, we'll make a difference.
Right. I think we will. I think we can make a huge difference just by everybody pitching in and talking about it and not making it the stigma. Break down that stigma. It's suicide. The word suicide. Say it with us. It's not something you have to hide from or run from. And the more we do, the worse it gets. So just like drugs and everything else. The more we hide from it. So.
Well, thank you very much for having us on.
You're
and
welcome.
Sort of continuing this conversation.
You're
really
welcome.
Appreciate it.
So I hope you guys got some information out of this. Again, this is part of our Suicide Awareness Prevention Month programming that we're doing this month, and this was, Substance Abuse Prevention and Awareness. I guess there's too many words. But this one focused specifically on suicide, because obviously this is a major issue and is related to all of this, because all of these kind of topics all sort of end up melding together at some point because they're all interrelated, basically, or intertwined. So if you have questions, you have a lot of resources on this website. I thought I was actually showing the resource page on the website. I'm going to show it one more time just for folks so you can check it out. If you have questions, there's a number of places you can call and reach out to, including, I imagine, you can call the NAN Project if you wanted to maybe scheduling something in their school, or you want to try to get that
just
going.
info@thenanproject.org. I'll get back to you within a day or two.
Excellent. Cool. Very good. Again, hope you got some good info. Feel free to check out the resource page. They also have a really nice video that they put together, 13 Reasons Why. Any questions for me, feel free to email me, sbrogan@tyngsborough.gov. And as always, you can catch all of this programming on Facebook, YouTube,
It's
Comcast
13 Reasons Why what?
13 Reasons Why We Need to Talk About Suicide.
Okay, 13 Reasons Why We Need to Talk About. There you go.
That's all right.
They'll follow the link. It'll take them there. But I'll throw the link to it in the comment section of this video below, so you can you don't have to go or try to find it. It'll be right there for you to click on and watch. And definitely share this with your friends, neighbors, relatives, and your vast social media networks, because it's a very important subject. And especially at the age group, the numbers are staggering. I mean, the statistics are just, I don't even want to talk about it because it's troubling. But we need to talk about it because it's important too. That's the only way we can beat it. So again, check us out on all those various places I mentioned. Any questions for me, sbrogan@tyngsborough.gov. And that wraps it up for us, folks. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time. See you on Friday. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.